Thanks so much, Mr. Gigrich, and dear Ministers of Defense, ladies and gentlemen, dear journalists. I'm pleased to address you here today at IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. For many years, in such summits, including here in Singapore, people discussed the importance of diplomacy. And it's often said that brutal force should not dominate the world. Similarly, attempts by various power centers to impose something on other nations against their will in politics, economy, or security should not dominate either. Diplomacy should be those caring and strong hands that prevent international disputes from turning into fights, restraining the most aggressive parties. This is how diplomacy often worked in the past. But frankly, the last few decades have not been a time for diplomacy. We have all felt this, and each region, sometimes even countries, has its own experience of how diplomacy has degraded, leaving only disappointment behind. In the 1990s, Ukraine suffered one of the greatest deceptions in the modern history when the security assurances from nuclear powers in exchange for the nuclear arsenal located in Ukraine did not translate into real security. It was exactly 28 years ago these days when Ukraine handed over its last nuclear warheads to Russia. In line with a multilateral international agreement, and it is Russia that has tried to erase Ukraine from the political map of the world. In the 2000s, Ukraine faced the first obvious violations by Russia on our territory and sovereignty, revealing that there was no element of the world's security architecture capable of restraining Russia and forcing it to stick to the principles and purposes of UN Charter. So Putin believes he is allowed to do anything. By the mid-2010s, Russia brought a war to our land, a war that we in Ukraine never wanted, did not provoke, and which expanded into the most treacherous invasion Europe has experienced since World War II. All of this was a series of diplomatic failures and constant attempts to keep the world divided into spheres of influence, which disrupts nations' lives and corrupts global powers. As a result, war. When unity was needed, the world was divided. When bold decisions were required, many were content with the status quo. And when preventive action was necessary to avoid the worst, the aggressor was somehow given time to prepare. We remember how Moscow tempted the world with the talks, all of which resulted in hollow wars or unacceptable ultimatums. Thus, we found ourselves in a war that now affects everyone in the world and spreads a globally dangerous cult of violence instead of trust in international law, trust that diplomacy should strengthen. But Ukraine will not complain, and I'm here to state we have found a way to restore diplomacy. This is the goal I spoke about last year at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and now we can make it real. Dear friends, not so long ago, it seemed that the world would always be fragmented. But we saw the most nations truly desire and are capable of cooperation, at least as far as collective security is concerned. A clear example are the coalitions from military to humanitarian, formal and informal, which help us withstand the war and prevent Russia from expanding it. These coalitions supporting Ukraine unite countries from all countries with different characters and worldviews. What brought them together? Naturally, diplomacy. Diplomacy does work when it truly aims to protect life. Together with partners, we are defending life and rules-based world order. We are working to obtain air defense systems and co-produce weaponry and drones. And we train our soldiers together. And we counter cyber threats together. We restore energy infrastructure damaged by Russian terror together. Just on Sunday night, Ukraine faced another round of Russian strikes. Nearly, during one day, imagine, nearly 100 missiles and drones. So this has happened hundreds of times throughout the war. And no country could handle this alone. And I thank everyone in the world who helps us with air defense systems, saving lives to our people, and the best, of course, the best Patriot systems, the United States, Germany, Netherlands, other our partners who helped us. Thank you so much. Together we are also bringing back Ukrainian children who were deported to Russia from the occupied territories of our country. And we know for sure about 20,000 Ukrainian children who were kidnapped by Putin, kidnapped and taken to Russia. And we know their names. And Russia itself claimed that it took several hundred thousands of our children from the occupied territories of Ukraine. Only the worst criminals do such things. And we must bring all of our children back to Ukraine, to relatives, to parents. Thanks Qatar for the help, and other countries, other partners also. Together with our partners, we are bringing back our captured soldiers. There are already dozens such joint initiatives, and they work not only for Ukraine. Countries from Libya and Sudan, Bangladesh, consume food produced in Ukraine. All of them benefited directly when we lifted the Russian blockade of our ports and resumed our food exports. Initially, this was achieved through international mediation together with Turkey and United Nations. Later, when Russia left the grain initiative, we resumed our contribution to global food security, thanks to our soldiers who defeated Russia at sea. And already 50 million tons of cargo have been exported through our new maritime corridor. But this was also made possible by diplomacy that supports Ukraine's resilience in battles. Once again, diplomacy does work. Now we are creating a new security architecture for Ukraine based on bilateral security agreements with our partners. There are already 15 such agreements, and more will come. And these agreements are comprehensive, covering everything from defense cooperation to political and economic interaction. The diplomacy restored the world's habit of keeping with the terms of agreements in real life. Besides, we've proven that now diplomacy resolves issues that Europe has been unable to solve for decades. Specifically, we have secured real steps towards Ukraine's integration with the EU, and Ukraine will definitely become EU member, a part of one of the biggest global markets and security space. And the key point, of course, peace. Our experience of restoring effective diplomacy has led us to the format of the Global Peace Summit. We are convinced that our world wants to be united and be capable of acting in a complete harmony. we've realized that nations equally reject the idea of someone secretly making decisions and imposing them. What is needed is open and inclusive dialogue. We have confirmed that the principles and purposes of the UN Charter and international conventions are entirely relevant. All this has become the basis our peace formula and has grown into the Global Peace Summit, so every leader and every country can show their commitment to peace. The global majority can ensure with their involvement that what is agreed upon is truly implemented, and so that Russia, who started this cruel war, cannot push us off the path to ending the war. More than 100 countries and international organizations have confirmed their participation in the summit for today. At the first summit, we will address 3 points of the peace formula: nuclear security, food security, and the release of prisoners of war. And of course, the Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. Time is running out, and the children are growing up in the Putin land, where they are taught to hate their homeland and are lied to, being told they have no families, while their loved ones wait for them at home in Ukraine. And after Peace Summit, when the global majority agrees on the common understandings and steps, the relevant parties will pass this to Russia, aiming for an outcome similar to the Grain Initiative. If these basic things are implemented, other points of the peace formula will work as well. Yes, we are disappointed that some world leaders have not yet confirmed their participation in the Peace Summit. Unfortunately, there are also attempts to disrupt the summit. We do not want to believe that this is a desire for monopolistic power in the world to deny the global community the opportunity to decide on war and peace, and to leave this power in the hands of one or two. We respect the UN Charter, respect every nation, and treat everyone equally. Only on this principle can the world be safeguarded from war. Ukraine proposed peace through diplomacy, an inclusive and fair former global peace summit, and I invite your region, your leaders, countries to join so that your peoples are involved in these global affairs, and by uniting against one war, we create for the world a real experience, the experience of overcoming any war, and of diplomacy that does work. Thank you for an invitation. Thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraini.
Mr. President, thank you so much for that address to the 21st ISS Shangri-La dialogue. We will have time for a few questions, and I want to start off, if I may, because you spoke about the path towards ending the war, and you spoke about the Global Peace Summit that is obviously a few weeks away now. What is the one thing, the most important thing you need at this stage from the international community as you pursue that path towards ending the war?
Дякую вам.
Thank you. Thank you once again for the invitation and for this question. You know, I believe that as of today, the main thing is that the civilized world has already done this main thing. It did not allow for the seizure of Ukraine. Alongside with our warriors, with our people, you know that in the first days of and weeks and months of the war, it was very difficult. It was simply very difficult. And the resilience of our nation, this resilience has provided strength to our warriors. And the united world ensured that Ukraine is not alone against the aggressor that violates international law. The issue is not with the name of the country. The question is not about naming the aggressor that now leads Russian Federation. The issue is about principles, the principles of respect to human life, to freedom, to the freedom of speech, to the will to choose one's own life and to have the right to live. And it seems to me that all this was violated by one single person, Putin. And it is of utmost importance that in the most difficult moment, the world, as it could, somebody more, somebody less, somebody with weapons, somebody diplomatically, someone doesn't have weapons, so help in humanitarian way, and somebody is a very, very small country that has no budget, and they were given the very last money they had simply to demonstrate that they are on the right side, that they are on the side of truth. And it seems to me that that is the most important thing that the world has done. Now Russia is trying to disrupt the peace summit, and that is true. That is true. We have, as of now, the confirmation from 106 countries of the world, and on the senior level of high representatives, on the level of leaders, 106 countries. And what Russia is doing, it is the country of war, and it is now traveling around many countries in the world, threatening them with the blockade of the agricultural goods, of the food products, of chemical products. It's threatening to damp the prices for the energy, and it is simply pushing the other countries of the world so that they are not present on the summit. This issue is not even about weaponry or support. This is about the support of the very end of the war, and it is disrupting it, and is doing it in all regions. And now there is some not good information that certain states have started to assist it in diplomatic disruption of the peace summit. And therefore, when you're asking what the world can do, the world has to be resilient, has to be strong, has to put pressure on Russia. There is no other way to stop Putin, only diplomatic isolation, strong Ukrainian military, and for all the countries of the world to not balance between Ukraine and Russia, but defend international justice and law.
Thank you very much. We have time to take a few questions from the floor. We will take them one by one. I can already say we won't get through all the lists that we have here on my screen, but I want to give President Zelensky a chance to answer each question that is posed to him. I'll start with a question from the region here, from Cambodia. Ned Chantima, please. Your microphone is live.
Thank you for the floor. President Zelensky, you remarked before that Israel's right to defense is indisputable, as the right to self-defense is codified under the UN Charter. Meanwhile, you and your Western allies have also repeatedly referred to the rule of law when conducting relations and responding to hostilities internally and in the international community. As such, don't you think there should be a collective call from yourself and your allies to call upon the Israeli government to adhere to international humanitarian law, namely the principle of proportionality, the distinction between combatants and civilians, and the prohibition of inflicting unnecessary suffering on the civilian Palestinian population? Thank you.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, how to counter any narratives and disinformation. To look into each fact separately, look into details, and to see the truth. You can ask the question as you have now posed, and to join all the questions to unite the attacks of Hamas against Israel and then the pressure of Israel to Gaza. Or you can look into details. Ukraine is a just country that respects international law and the UN Charter. Ukraine has said if terrorists from Hamas, and this was in the first days of the terrorist attack against Israel, if terrorists of Hamas attack civilians, Israel has the right to defend. So let's not mix everything to one issue. And then afterwards, Ukraine has said, when Israel was in the territory of Gaza and there was a humanitarian crisis, Ukraine said, first, we are ready to help humanitarianly to Gaza. Secondly, you need to respect international laws. Thirdly, Ukraine recognizes two states, Israel and Palestine, and it will do everything for Israel to stop, to end this conflict so that civilians do not suffer. So please do not mix the two periods into one.
Thank you very much. I will next ask the Executive Chairman of the ISS from the UK, Sir John Chipman.
Mr. President, one of the principles of international law is that if one country illegally invades another country, they are liable to pay compensation and reparations for the loss of property and persons. When, after Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the war ended with Saddam Hussein retreating to Baghdad, a UN compensation committee did disperse elements of Iraq's state assets to compensate Kuwait. There is a legal argument that Russia's state assets could similarly be used. Will this issue be discussed at your peace conference?
The question of justice, of which the frozen assets is part of, and compensation is part of. Everything that Russia has brought to Ukrainian territory, we can discuss this, but this issue will not be in our communique because there will be three issues on this summit: food security, nuclear security, and getting back stolen Ukrainian children. These are three main issues. Undoubtedly, the question regarding frozen assets, it is being discussed permanently by our partners. Of course, Russia has to feel that this war is of high price, but not only to us, for European continent, and for Africa or Asia because of the blockade of the Black Sea and food products, but because they are the aggressor. And for this, we need to have an opportunity. We need to be given the opportunity. This will be right to say that we are being given an opportunity for a certain mechanism to use frozen assets. Now, only in Europe, there are around 300 billion of such assets. This will not be enough to compensate for everything that Russia has done in Ukraine, but if the frozen assets will be not only frozen in the EU, but will be used in Ukraine, then the immediate circle next to Putin and Putin himself, they will feel that this war is expensive to them.
Thank you very much. We have a very long list, but we're running out of time. So I'll ask for one more question that I'll ask President Zelensky to address, and I'll give the floor to Vela Nouns, please.
Thank you, Bastian. President Zelensky, with a view to the Global Peace Summit to be convened in Switzerland in 2 weeks' time, what would you hope for from this region, from countries in this region? And perhaps to Minister Ung, how might Singapore be able to support this process? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vela. If I may ask President Zelensky to address that question, then I'll give the word to Minister Ung to speak for the host nation, Mr. President.
Firstly, it is of great pleasure for me to be in Singapore, and I'm very pleased that me and my team were invited today. I will have the meeting with the President and Prime Minister of Singapore. We will discuss in details our bilateral relations, but the most important thing, I would really want the leader of Singapore to support Ukraine with his personal participation in the peace summit. And the same goes about the countries in the region. We truly count that you will support this summit. You will be present in Switzerland. We have on the agenda three points, but yet again I underscore, we are very open, normal people, and this was previously discussed with the Swiss side. We are ready to hear various proposals and thoughts that lead us not to continuation of the war, this is important, but to the end of it, and to sustainable and just peace for Ukraine.